And it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker for this segment, which is Katy Davies, who's the Managing Director of CamdenBoss. And I think Katy will do a particularly good job at nicely segueing us between the future of work and the future of economy.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here this afternoon, and for the big build up there. This morning I'll take you on a bit of a canter through kind of my view of the world, so give you a bit of context of where I'm coming from. And it's been quite an interesting exercise kind of preparing for this morning in terms of kind of what do I, from my position and given my background, see as almost like the Katy manifesto for the next 15 years in terms of the future of the economy. So we'll cover some broad, lofty topics, which, as Jan said, probably knits through a whole load of stuff rather than being too economically technical. So by way of introduction, my name is Katy Davies. I'm Managing Director of CamdenBoss. We are a medium-sized manufacturer based in Mildenhall in Suffolk, and we design and manufacture electromechanical components, connectors and plastic enclosures. So effectively really fancy plastic boxes to house other people's incredible technology. So anything from EV chargers through to room sensors, through to water monitors that are going into Africa to make sure that people have safe drinking water, which is fantastic. By background, I've come into the SME world having worked in large corporates. So I worked for Deloitte for a long time, advising privately owned businesses, and then spent 10 years working in a large aerospace company. So I guess that's to give you a bit of context as to what I'm going to talk about right now. So trying to frame kind of what the future of the economy looks like to me as a leader of an SME. The SME environment is really interesting. And again, it's quite different from my background. So when you think about the kind of SME ecosystem, it's incredibly large. So, doing a bit of Googling, as you do for these things, the World Economic Forum states that 90% of global firms are comprised of SME businesses, which is incredible. And that kind of really framed to me that actually, the value of the whole really is larger than the sum of its parts. There's an awful lot of us doing some interesting things, all struggling with the same challenges, all trying to kind of get ahead, keep up with the world, with a pretty sharp, team and structure behind us. It's quite a challenging place to be, and trust me, it's been very challenging the past couple of years. And we don't have that luxury that I've necessarily had previously of working in a larger corporate where you've got peers to bounce ideas from, you've got an expert in all sorts of things that you can just pick up the phone to for free and ask a bit of advice. Definitely have had to call in a lot of favours over the last couple of years to try and get me through some of these challenges, which really got me thinking about the future of the economy from an SME landscape is actually, I work in Suffolk. We've got a really interesting SME ecosystem there. You've got a lot of just general manufacturers who are doing some really niche things. And it's quite fascinating because we don't directly compete with each other. And through that, it really starts to build a sense of collaboration. So we've got some really awesome neighbours who will stick their head above the parapet and will kind of pick up the phone and say, well, actually, how are you, talking about sustainability, and from an SME standpoint, how do you really make a meaningful start on that? What have you tried? How did you get started? It's all quite overwhelming, channeling something that Chris started us out with this morning. Sharing that knowledge and sharing improvements, what worked for you, what didn't, is absolutely critical to the kind of future survival of the SME kind of landscape, and getting a bit brave and getting a bit kind of honest, I suppose it is, in sharing where your pain has been, will massively accelerate the ability of SMEs to grow and to flourish. Equally, taking that one step further on, we all have kind of a pretty tight labour budget. We're all looking for more productivity. We're all looking to keep our workforces growing, learning, but also staying productive. Actually, if you've got a bit of spare capacity in your team, why couldn't we get into a place where SMEs are sharing talent? We constantly have this real challenge of we don't want to lose our really good people. Obviously, nobody wants to lose their really good people, and you can be really proud when they go, but you've got that kind of sharp tinge to it, haven't you? But what a brilliant way to exist by sharing out your people or seconding them to another business that's similar. It doesn't necessarily compete. You're not necessarily going to lose them long term, but the value to that employee of kind of gaining some experience somewhere else, plus also saving you a little bit of wage bill in the meantime, would be a fantastic place to be. So that's definitely on my manifesto for the next 15 years. And I think through that, it's about using that or leveraging that 90% of of all businesses being SMEs, you're leveraging that to create our own economies of scale. We don't necessarily have it as individuals, but actually, and I know the pandemic's been quite a good catalyst for this, having conversations with our neighbours about our supply chains. So, one of our local businesses based up the road in Thetford, they were having a challenge with some plastic sourcing. That's my material. That we use that a lot. We've got our own stuff to do on our own supply chain, but we know how to procure that. So actually, why can't we work on that together and create a bit more economy of scale together? Again, we're not competing. There's nothing to be lost. It's a complete win-win. I'm normally a very glass half full kind of person, but then when my mind went in terms of my manifesto for the next 15 years was a little bit doomy, so please do excuse me. But it kind of got me thinking about with the topic of today being digitalisation. Actually, it almost becomes a bit, particularly for SMEs, a bit of a survival of the fittest type moment. So actually that digital rapid acceleration of change is a massive opportunity for us. But actually there's a real challenge for SMEs who aren't engaging with it or don't see it coming to avoid being left behind. So it looks a bit doomy, so I do apologise. And it's on a black slide, which doesn't help, does it, really? But there's a massive challenge in there about keeping up with the pace of change. We've got change coming at us from all angles, socially, through social media, in terms of markets changing, in terms of digital solutions, providing a totally different angle for either techniques within manufacturing or disruptions to our markets. How are we keeping on top of that? Again, the answer is probably through digital solutions. So, how can we leverage the talent that we've got in there to make sure that we keep up? And again, as an SME ecosystem, that's a massive threat to me, but a massive opportunity in itself. In terms of the social change piece, we'll come on to that a little bit later, and we've talked a lot about people and skills. But again, from SME manufacturers, I look around kind of my local industrial estate, and you've got a lot of people who have existed in a certain way for a long period of time. They've got their kind of source of labour, they're not going anywhere, it's all fine. Actually, we've got a massive tide of social change coming, and if you're not on top of it or you're not ready for it, you're going to get left behind. We've talked about sustainability, and Amy did a brilliant piece on the environment, but again, from the SME standpoint, you do sometimes still encounter that attitude of, we're small, it's not going to affect us. But actually, it is. We all know it is, and they probably know it is, but are they doing anything about it? And how can we access it? So I guess from a digital solution standpoint, the key for the next 15 years, I guess, is how can we make sure that there are relatively straightforward entry steps or entry tools for SMEs to be able to access what that sustainability move really means to them, because it can get really overwhelming. So, for instance, a really great piece of work that I saw just recently from the Institute for Manufacturing was around, chill out, everybody, it's okay. You can make meaningful steps by just embracing lean. If you're reducing waste, your bottom line will improve, but actually you are creating less carbon. So, there are ways to go. And then a very doomy last point about adapt or die. But very seriously, we're very lucky when we come across, groups like Make UK or again, in the Norfolk-Suffolk space, we have a brilliant organisation funded by the LEP that brings us together. But that's great for the SMEs that are happy to stick their head above the parapet and go out and seek things. There's still a massive proportion of that 90% of firms who are SMEs who aren't in that space, who aren't brave enough to get out or don't even realise they need to do it. So there is a serious message in there. So coming on to the people piece, I know we've talked about it a lot so far this morning, but earlier this year I was at Make UK conference and Andrew Neil was the opening speaker, and as you can imagine it was very lively, and he made a very flippant point that we all needed to go back to the office and fire our HR directors, which obviously got good titter from around the audience. But actually his point was really incredibly valid behind that. His point being that we've come across scarce resources. We've been shown, as we were talking earlier with Kim's session on supply chains, the last couple of years have shown us where our scarce resources are, be they Northern Italy, be they Ukraine, etc. But when we look at the next 15 years, our top scarce resource is going to be talent. So actually, it's not HR's problem. People are all of our problems. That in itself drives a massive change. Building on from Bhavina's point about leadership and management, my observation through manufacturing is that that the role of that leadership and those managers has massively changed in the last couple of years, let alone 15 years. You know, it used to be, again, particularly from the SME environment, it used to be that your best technical whoever became the manager of that team. So if you were the best machine operator, you would manage that team. It's rapidly changing. So actually, our best people managers are few and far between, but we really need to look after them. We need to identify them early and give them those skills to be able to flourish, because that world is massively changing. But equally, we need to support those people who are suddenly completely lost, who are those technical people who are faced with a completely bizarre world that they can't get their head around because they don't have those people skills. Again, it's been mentioned earlier, and I couldn't agree more with what Bhavina just said. When we talk about hope that works. Okay. Yeah, so we're dangerously commutable to Cambridge. So we are at risk of, falling foul of this poor reputation that manufacturing has started, has kind of gathered over the last couple of decades. So it's really incumbent on all of us to really sing up the point of manufacturing and get young people, get anybody curious about where things come from. So without being too disingenuous, I was asked to review a council skills page for their kind of, young people's handbook on what you could do with your career. And the page for manufacturing started out with a big orange pop-out at the top saying, 2/3 of jobs in this industry are being, 2/3 of jobs in this industry are being replaced by digital solutions. And I thought, I don't even want to work there, let alone like a young person looking at it. It's crazy. I get the point that they're trying to, propose the fact that there's loads of digital skills needed in manufacturing, but not a way to do it. Absolutely not a way to do it. So how do we get people excited about manufacturing again and really compete with those big, kind of slightly sexier industries that are around? So when I wrote the slide, I knew I wouldn't be able to get my teeth around this next one, but it sounded really good at the time. But there's a really interesting observation right now that we've got more generations at work, in the workplace, than we ever have. And that'll only continue, won't it, as we get kind of people staying in work longer. I was really lucky, probably a month or so ago, to go and visit a local business who, they are a metal precision worker. And I ended up in one of their workshops, and on one side of me I had a chap who'd been there celebrating his 41st work anniversary with that same company. Really fascinating guy. And going back to stereotypes, his workstation was immaculate. He was perfectly dressed. He was, measuring everything. It was just impeccably done. Right next to him was their 18-year-old apprentice. And the two of them were sparring. That old guy, he's really old-fashioned. He makes me do all this boring stuff I don't want to do. Why do I want to sweep up? Blah, 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 blah. He's really stuck in his ways. And then equally you had the old guy saying, that young kid, he turns up, he's scruffy, he's got no discipline, blah, 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 blah. And after the joking had passed, there was a massive amount of mutual respect there. So the older guy, sort of said, we've introduced cobots. Absolutely blows my mind. I'm not massively interested in learning how they work because I'm kind of about a year away from retirement. But this young guy, it's nothing to him. He can program it. It's incredible. And equally, the young guy was sort of saying, well, actually, this older chap, he's explained to me why he is the way he is, why he keeps his workstation so neat, and actually it does really make a massive difference to quality and to da-da-da-da-da. And you sort of think, actually, if you can get that generational range optimised, it's a tough thing to do, but I think there's a massive amount of opportunity there to really kind of blend across those different generations and those different outlooks. I think in terms of thinking about kind of particular skills that almost sit underneath all of the people that we're looking for, where we're talking about kind of, war for talent and what are we looking for in our people, particularly young people, there's a massive piece in there about actually entrepreneurship and creativity. I think all of us would appreciate some people in our business who are just generally creative, inquisitive, creative, keen to spot a gap somewhere. And I don't know how you really teach that. And we'll come to that in a minute, but I think there's a massive piece in there about kind of sparking entrepreneurship and creativity in our young people. And then the last point, I kind of get stuck on a little bit in terms of the high-wage, high-skill economy. So we were talking about it earlier in Tam's session. you know, we hear about it a lot in terms of government policy. I would say most manufacturers, or most SME manufacturers, don't actually know what that means to them and therefore what they need to do to get there. Oh, okay, sorry. I could talk forever, I apologise. So building on, last but not least, when we're talking about the future economy, there's a massive piece in there about kind of support and government support, especially for the SME scene. You know, it's incredibly important to us what we can get and what the government policy or what economic policy is kind of driving in us. Simplicity is what we'd really love. The number of businesses or number of organisations, sorry, that are there to signpost support is a reflection of how complex it is out there. And there's a massive amount of disparity and chaos. So, for instance, I'm a SME manufacturer, but I'm 100% owned by a holding company that has kind of other investments in other businesses, other sectors. We're the only manufacturer, but we are instantly ruled out of any EU funding because we're large and complex. We're not. Anyway, so it's a bit painful. And I think just recently it's shown just how important that really clear industrial strategy is in terms of building on us. So going back to the skills piece, I think we're in a position where the skills systems and education system generally just doesn't really seem to work for anybody. So I'd love to see, you know, obviously Liz Truss has started out being very bold. I'd quite like to see some boldness applied in that direction because none of us are getting what we need, I don't think, out of the current systems. And I think more than anything, you know, again, when we're talking about digital solutions, I think the bits where we really need support as SMEs is almost kind of addressing the foundations. When we're talking about productivity gaps and innovation with a small I, I definitely observe that we haven't got lean right. You know, we're still back in a couple of decades ago where we haven't really embedded lean as a fundamental concept, and it makes it quite difficult then when we come to great institutions like Made Smarter, we can't articulate what the problem is quite often, or we don't know what's out there to really get our head around. So I definitely say keep it really simple, and that would be really helpful. Sorry to run on.
Thank you. So thank you very much. That was brilliant. We will take questions over lunch, but that was really great. Thank you very much.